All right. So thank you for bringing or allowing me to join SUG Pittsburgh. So today I'll be talking a little bit about my topic that I just presented at SUGCon Europe 2024. Um, this is why you'll see SUGCon 2024 throughout the deck, because I haven't had a chance to remove all the kind of messaging stuff. So today I plan to talk a little bit about kind of an interesting topic for XP customers considering moving to the composable SaaS world. Um, just a kind of a little backstory of this topic for those that are curious. My inspiration for this topic was the participation in the internal Sitecore AI hackathon that our DevRel team participated in. We were tasked with creating a chatbot. Well, we weren't tasked, but that was our what we wanted to try to achieve was to build a chatbot for the developer portal. I'm actually thinking about submitting the chatbot part, and talking a little bit about the personalized side for symposium. So that going a little bit more into that specific topic. But for the chatbot, we kind of built some behavioral personalization capabilities for the chatbot, to kind of help it as people navigate the site of the developer portal. It would kind of learn information about you, and then it would use that to kind of guide or provide more detailed responses from Gen AI, essentially. Also, a lot of folks have been asking me about, or in the community have been asking me, how do you do XP pattern cards with Personalize? Is it even possible? So I always knew it was, but I couldn't explain how. So this was my inspiration for this topic, was to achieve that, basically achieve something like XP pattern profile cards, but with XM Cloud and Personalize. So that's what I'm going to show today, among other things. um, so before I begin, just introduce myself for those that don't know who I am. I'm a developer advocate at Sitecore. I've been at Sitecore for 2.5 years now. During that time, my focus has been CDP and Personalize primarily, but I've kind of gone into all kinds of forms of personalization, as we'll see at the end of the last use case I'll talk about. And I also talk about migrations as well. So that kind of relates to the XP topic of this presentation. Before joining Sitecore, I was a 5-time Sitecore Technology MVP, and I've actually been working with Sitecore for just about 10 years now. In July or August, I have officially been, that's when I learned 10 years ago, learned Sitecore. So it's hard to believe I've been working with Sitecore for a decade almost now. And if you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to me via my blog. You can read all the content I create. I create a ton of content on CDP and personalized topics. And I actually have a link at the end of this presentation that's specifically curated content for this topic, where I go into very specific details about this presentation. All right. So here's our agenda for today. There was actually quite a lot to get through. When I did this at SUGCon, it was about 35 minutes long. So I'm going to just jump into all these things. So the first thing, I'm going to kind of set the stage on a few different topics around the title of this topic. And so the first one is, what is XM Cloud Plus? Um, so, so XM essentially is private cloud. So XM would be, if you wanted to host it yourself, you'd have XM. And if you want to go to SaaS, then you would look at something like XM Cloud. The same is kind of true for XP. If you are XP, then you're likely self-hosting it in your own private cloud offering in AWS or Azure, whatever the case may be. But if you wanted to go to SaaS, you would want something that has the same capabilities of XP, but in the SaaS world. And this is kind of what XM Cloud Plus is supposed to represent. It's a bundling of the different products that kind of represents the XP features. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about a few of these specific bundled products. I'm actually not going to talk about them all. So I could have gone into CDP and talked about specific use cases related to this topic for CDP and Connect and Content Hub 1, but I'm not going to do that. So all the topics or all the use cases I talked about today are going to really focus on XM Cloud plus Personalize. But the last use case is also going to bring in search into that mix as well. So the other kind of topic to talk about is what is behavioral personalization? What is that? What does that term represent? It's all about collecting data on the users from viewing habits of the user. So it's kind of a topic of indirect versus direct data collection. So if it was direct, this would be a form that you might have where you collect a person's first name, last name, email, etc. But in our case, behavioral personalization is kind of this indirect method of knowing a little bit more about the users as they navigate the site or the site that they're visiting, the different pages that they're visiting. So we'll be focusing mostly on our two use cases on browsing history. Although technically in the second use case on the show is you could also look at search queries as well, because Sitecore Search has the capability of bringing back that information as well in the API I'm going to talk about a little bit in that use case. In our case, we are going to make certain assumptions about our users. Getting some back feed. I don't know why, but we're going to make certain assumptions. It went away, so I don't know. We're going to make certain assumptions about our users based on the pages that they visit. So, be based on specific pages that they might visit. Like if they visit a sessions page, we can make certain assumptions about their interests, their desires, based on that pages that they visit. This kind of concept of applying additional meaning to our pages is really just like XP. So in XP, we could assign additional values to our pages via profile cards, and that could assign additional scoring to that. So for our use case today, kind of set the stage a little bit about our first use case. We're going to use 3 different personas for our demonstration. We have a tech enthusiast, a business professional, and a student learner. We'll be applying these changes to the SUGCon North America website. This is part of the open source XM Cloud intro project. So, and these changes are already applied to that site. So if you wanted to take a look at how these changes were applied, you could do that. You could take a look at that GitHub repository to do that. These are just examples. I just really want to show an example of how you would do this with this specific use case. So I use ChatGPT to come up with our personas and some of the attributes that are for those personas. We have 4 different attributes or profile keys as they were referred to in XP. They are assigned different values per persona. So kind of representing that table on this slide. Those same attributes, then we can also assign to that we assign to the personas. We can also assign those to the pages. And so, for example, the homepage, everyone's going to visit that homepage. So we wouldn't really want to score anything. We really can't, make any assumptions about, the values of those attributes that we can score to those pages. We can't really make any assumptions about the users. While someone that views the session or training pages, we can kind of assume that they're likely seeking knowledge or something like that. So we can assign a higher score value to those pages versus other pages. Obviously, like I said, this is just an example how you would score these and assign these. Same kind of concept as XP, and that would be an exercise for potentially a strategist to come up with scoring mechanisms and how they would be scored. So, lastly, just to take a glance at what this means for XP. So this will give us an idea of what we're trying to achieve today with XM Cloud and Personalize. So in XP, you had profiles, profile keys, patterns, profile cards, a bunch of terminology. Luckily, I still remember what all those mean. I didn't have to look them up again, but it's really just a naming convention that represents, that helps you define these personas and then assign keys or attributes to pages. Unfortunately, the configuration for XP, the marketing control panel specifically, no longer exists in XM Cloud today. So we kind of have to actually recreate this. We'll be recreating it with templates and then defining items for those templates. Like I said, the goal is to achieve exactly the same thing as XP, but with XM Cloud and Personalize. So let's talk a little bit about our first use case and talk about how we can do this with XM Cloud and Personalize. So, like I said, recreating the items for the configuration of the personas and attributes is the first step. So in the screenshot there on the left, it looks very similar to the configuration of XP. I have a link at the end of this where I provide the links to the PRs that I did for the XM Cloud Intro project. So if you wanted to recreate those exact templates, then you could do that. We also needed to assign our persona attributes to the pages themselves. I do not show that in this demo. Maybe if there's enough time at the end on the demo I'll show, I can show that stuff as well. But it's just a field that's on the pages themselves that I've added that allows you to assign the attributes that we're defining in this screenshot on the left. Once it's published to the edge, the Engage Cloud SDKs are then used to consume this data as arbitrary data for use in Personalize. So I'm going to show how to make those configuration changes to those SDKs. So like I said, I'm going to show those changes that are needed. This, I'm assuming, is that you're using the foundation head for your XM Cloud project. You're using XJS, and this is going to assume everything before 21.6. I'll talk about 21.6 in a second. I unfortunately can't talk about 21.7. That came out just the day before my presentation at SUGCON, so I haven't had a chance to see what types of changes that that's going to bring in that require maybe modifications to this. So the first thing I did is I opted to replace the default CDP page view. So basically just did that. And like I said, I duplicated it, and then I applied my custom changes within that file, that SUGCON CDP page view. The reason I did that was I didn't want, if you were going to do an upgrade, I didn't want there to be conflicting changes. So there's a separate file that you can make your changes to, which we're going to make quite a few changes. And yeah. Now, in our custom file, basically the one I cloned, the original file, I cloned it into this file, and then I've made a few different changes to this file. first I needed to create or customize the create page view. This is a function that's in that file. By default, it takes route, but it's a string URL, not a route data or essentially an object. So I had to change it so that I could essentially access the fields that come from route data. So that was the first change I had to make. And then this will allow us to then read that data from the fields. In our case, this is the page level item, and it will allow us to pull in those page attributes from the from that. Uh, so if I click, then basically this is essentially representing that. So if the profile attributes, which is the name of the field I have on the page item, exists, then we set it to additional data, and we then pass it into the page view event for the Engage SDK. And it essentially takes an optional parameter for additional data or something known as arbitrary data. And that's not usually that's not being used in the kind of out of the box Engage SDK XM Cloud intro project or XM Cloud um, foundation head project. So this is basically what we're modifying. So you could modify it to do other things as well. This is just one example of how you could modify it. So if you're using 21.6, the big difference with 21.6 and above, and well, I'm not going to talk about 21.7, is the introduction of Cloud SDK. It essentially, in this kind of sense, replaces the Engage SDK. Technically, the Cloud SDK has the Engage SDK within it. So there's only some slight modifications that were needed in order to use the Cloud SDK here. And you can see just the changes where we're calling into passing those events, and the arbitrary data is just slightly different. I've seen a little bit for JSS 21.7. It looks like it's changed slightly again. So it's just kind of keeping up with the slight changes of the updates. And the Cloud SDK is the future. So maybe an option here would be to update to the latest version of JSS before you make changes to the Engage SDK stuff, because then you could just make it to the Cloud SDK and not need to worry about updating later on and having to change it. And then lastly, one other important change I had to make to the rendering host is for our demo today. And this wouldn't apply to everyone necessarily, but I am going to be doing a demo where I'm using Sitecore Personalize and a web experience, which is a specific type of way to do the personalizations. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the strategy behind that in a second, or choosing which method you use with XM Cloud. But because of that, there's some changes that you have to make into the Engage SDK. Just additional parameters you have to pass in. The most important one is the web personalization needs to be equal to true on your init, which you can see is basically in our subcon CDP page view file that we were modifying earlier. I didn't comment on this at subcon because I wasn't sure if I should mention it, but if you're using the Cloud SDK with JSS 21.6 or above, web experiences are not supported. So if you wanted to go the web experience route, then you might have to choose a different option. And we'll talk about the other option that exists in a second. So now we've configured XM Cloud. So basically, we're storing all the configuration for these personas and the attributes, and then we're publishing those, and the Engage or Cloud SDKs are essentially picking up those attributes. And now we need to control or essentially allow you to do personalization with Sitecore Personalize using that data. So there's various ways. I spent quite some time on this because I wanted to do it one way for this demo, but there's various ways to achieve this if you have Sitecore Personalize alongside XM Cloud. There are conditions which are fantastic. They work great with XM Cloud pages. Unfortunately, they don't really work in all use cases. They are great for very simple use cases where you are trying to maybe personalize based on simple data needs. But if you need something where you need to essentially pull in maybe a connection or maybe use a decision model, then they're not necessarily the best use case here. And that was essentially our use case for this demo, is that I needed a decision model because I needed a connection back into XM Cloud to pull back the persona data that we're making decisions on. And so because of that, we really only have two options, which is a web experience, which is what I'll show today, and therefore requires that change JSS 21.5 or below for the Engage SDK. Or there's another approach called a full stack interactive experience. It can vary on how complex that is to implement. There's some work that we've been doing to try to come up with a kind of a best practice of a way to implement that. But it requires development to use a full stack interactive experience. So for simplicity's sake, I attempted to do a condition, but unfortunately, I found my use case was too complex for it. So I went with a web experience with the decision model. So we'll talk about that in a second. I do have a blog that goes through this in more detail. And then also I do plan on creating more content when we figure out a better way to do the full stack interactive experiences. I do think that's the better way of doing things, but it does require development to do that with Personalize and XM Cloud. All right. So last thing before we jump into the demo is really the most important part to this whole use case is the algorithm that drives it. This is the same algorithm that was used in Sitecore XP. It's the n-dimensional Euclidean distance calculation. Really, this is the secret sauce to how it works. There are some slight differences to our way of doing, or well, I say my way, I guess, of doing this calculation versus probably how XP was built. XP first is using .NET. What I have is a JavaScript representation of that same algorithm. Also, there's more involved in the calculation for XP. I know they bring in, Sitecore brings in decay rate. I don't calculate decay rate, but decay rate is essentially a way that as somebody navigates to multitudes of pages, after some point, the persona that it kind of tags you as, the user as, if you don't have decay rate or something like that, some mechanism like that, then eventually it just seems to say you're always the same persona, because it gets to a score where it's really hard to change your persona to something else. The decay rate essentially allows you to, if you get to a point where, the data is older, that is less valuable than the data that is more current. And then lastly, fun fact about the Euclidean n-dimensional Euclidean distance calculation is it's also used in machine learning with the n-nearest algorithm, which is used for data classification. Just random thought. I researched this topic and I realized it is used in other places as well. All right, let me jump in to pull up the demo. Give me a second here. All right. How this is going to look, but um, so first I'm going to take a look at the SugCon North America site. So what I wanted to just do is trigger these personas that I have configured. Um, Unlike XP, where you have to navigate to three different pages before it starts identifying you as a persona, I have it set up to just do it from the first click on. So this is one of the more powerful features about this is that you can customize this to do however you want. If it's after three or if it's after just the first, it's up to you to do. So the first one I wanted to take a look at was get the student learner to identify. So if we looked over at the sessions page, I don't know how this looks in the screen share. Gonna ping or not. I noticed it was paused before I started this. Demos. It actually worked in person, but right. Work. Oh, hold on a second. Let me just close this. Can't log in. 1 second. All right. Sessions. There we go. Whoops. I can view this, but so yeah, I clicked on sessions, and now on the far right we get tech enthusiast. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe I haven't cleared my cookies for this. Um, but essentially, as we navigate around, you saw the table for how I scored each page. As you navigate around, you could go here as well. It's na.sugcon.events. And as you navigate around, you should be able to see um, a thing comes up from the right side that essentially shows you what your persona is based on what pages that you're looking at. Let me just clear my cookies real quick. We'll start over at the home page. And so the way it's configured is the homepage should not trigger that right hand pop up, but as you navigate, it should trigger. So let's go to the speakers. If I go to speakers, that should load up the business professional. All right, that seems to be correct. But then as you navigate around, your persona can shift. So sessions are usually more tied to knowledge seeking. So it slowly is changing. I think I can get training is also knowledge seeking. So I can kind of maybe eventually get it to focus on maybe not. I don't know. Anyways, so let's not worry about that too much. I don't demos. But let's pop on over to how it's all configured. So log into Cloud Portal. So Hold on a second. So once we're in Cloud Portal, then we can navigate over to. So this demo requires that you don't just have XM Cloud, you'd have a personalized tenant tied to your XM Cloud instance. In our case, we have this one that the dev relations team is using. And so we can navigate into that. And then once it loads, then eventually. This demo went very smoothly in person. Not this time. Anyways, so once we're there, we'll go to the web experience. Like I said, I'm creating a web experience versus a full stack experience or full stack interactive experience. Long name. And so I've been testing some stuff, but essentially it's this one, the version 2 of this. And so one thing that I think messed up my demo at the start was I do have to pause it to take a look at the build configuration, and I had paused it and I'd forgotten to start it from Silicon Europe, and that's probably what screwed up my demo at the start. So once it's paused, then we can take a look at build. And we can take a look. It's really straightforward from the configuration here because all we are doing is we're creating an experience, which I'll take a look at. It's just using the out-of-box Sitecore library experience. One difference that is here that is not, or I would say less standard, is in our decision model, which I'll show in a second, is I have a decision table that spits out a title, a description, an image, and I believe that's it. And so there's a way that inside your experience, you can use kind of like this handlebar syntax where you say results.persona title. This is pulling from our decision table. And so this is just one way you could do the personalization. You could not use the decision table, return it back and personalize a different way. But this is just the way I decided to do the personalizations to show which persona is being returned. So the other thing I mentioned is that the way the page targeting was configured is that it doesn't do the personalization or the web experience essentially on the homepage. Everywhere else it should. That's basically what this is doing, the page targeting. And then lastly is our decision model, which is really where all the magic happens. So we'll take a look at that. And you can see I've also iterated on this a few times, but the decision model we're using is this one. Not many nodes, but there's a lot going on in the nodes. At the bottom left, kind of starting bottom to top, is the standard practice for decision model, or the way to organize the nodes of the decision model. So bottom left is our connection into XM Cloud. So what this allows for is the personas that we configured in XM Cloud. The marketer or whoever can then configure these however they want and change them even after this decision model has been pushed out. And that just allows one single source of truth for the personas, which are then used to just make a decision here in a second. The other thing that happens is our programmable for guest attributes. And all this is doing is it's kind of collecting all that arbitrary data that we were passing in via the Engage SDK changes that we made. So it's setting an arbitrary value called profile attributes, and it's just kind of going through all the events and sessions of this user and kind of packaging them up into an array that then we'll use in our function above that. How you do this is another like customization that you could make. I'm doing this, I think, up to 30 times or events that it finds the results. So you could do it just per session or per event or however you choose to. So this could be custom to your needs specifically. To back up the canvas, so all that stuff comes up into this calculate closest persona. This is where all the magic happens. There's a lot of code here. I'm not going to go and explain it all, but I do have this written out on my blog in one of the blog posts of this code. I do plan on trying to get this in another form that's easy to use as well. But it takes in the persona data, it takes in the guest data that we were pulling from those further down nodes, and then it basically passes that into some functions where it calculates Euclidean distance and determines which one is the closest based on the attributes. And then whichever one is closest, it basically returns that single closest persona. And then that is then sent to this decision table where we take the matched persona and we look at it's either the student, the business professional, or the tech enthusiast. And then we return the title description or the image. And that's why it changes as you navigate. It's basically matching up to a different persona as you go through and get different page attributes from that. All right, that's it for the demo. Let's go on to, because I think I'm running low on time. Let's continue on real quick. One second. My notes, there we are. So that's the first use case. The second use case is with XM Cloud with Search and Personalize. So this is a slightly different use case. So this doesn't use pattern or profile cards. This actually uses a different mechanism. So inside Sitecore Search, there is something called affinity scoring, which helps Sitecore Search essentially return more relevant personalized search results. Affinity scoring is not about using well, there's essentially two types of personalization that exist inside Sitecore Search. There's more like this, which is using documents or essentially using the relevancy of a document to deem what should be ranked higher in the search results. And then there's something called affinity scoring, which is going to use the visitor's browsing history, essentially just like the first use case that we talked about, to determine what they are most interested in. So an example of this would be a user maybe likes viewing a specific type of content. Maybe let's say you have an attribute for your search results of like the type. So it could be a blog, a doc, or maybe some sort of insights article, however you've classified the search results content. And so as a user navigates to mostly blogs or mostly docs or whatever the case may be, it's going to detect that you have affinity or a likelihood or an interest in a certain type of document. And so what you score or how you assign or assign these attributes is up to you. It's based on the attributes that you have inside your search results. So for our use case, we are using this search tenant that's tied to the developer portal. In our case, we're using product name. So as somebody navigates the site, there's the content that's stored inside our search index is going to be tied to, Sitecore Search, X Cloud, maybe CDP, etc. So as the user navigates, Sitecore Search is actually building a user profile about that user, about what pages they're viewing, their search keywords, and also their affinity scores. So we can use this data in a decision model inside Sitecore Personalize, and that's what I'll be talking a little bit about. So we can access this data from an API. I have not seen this API talked about in the docs. So, just heads up that it's not something that's talking about in the docs, but it basically essentially includes this behavioral data for the user. I do have a link there. I've gone into deep details about this API specifically. So how to customize what you're passing in and what gets returned is included in that blog post. So if you wanted to start using this, you could start doing it, because this is kind of high level overview, what I'm covering today. But if you wanted to do it specifically, then read the blog post. It's all about getting access to that search user ID. So as somebody navigates the site, there's a user ID for Sitecore Search that exists. If you're using there's a couple different ways to get access. If you're using the Search React SDK, then you can use the method I have on the screen there to get access to it. But you can also access it client side via the cookie. So that's another way to access it, because you'll need it for the API, because it requires not just the domain ID, but it also requires that user ID. And then what you can do is then once you have that ID, you can then you can send that to Personalize via a full stack interactive experience. You can pass it additional data to an interactive experience, and you can send it that ID, which then allows you to use it in a decision model. So just a quick talk through for the decision model. I was going to demo this live at one point, but I figured it was pretty straightforward. And really, this topic is, or at least what I'm showing is just showing it is possible. I'm not necessarily going into how you could use this, but if you use the full stack interactive experience, you could trigger this decision model, and then it could return back the whatever your affinity that you're trying to get back, or you could return back search results or whatever the user's searching for or what pages the user has looked at. So basically from top to bottom, or bottom to top, I mean, in this diagram, we have a connection at the bottom. This is basically the API I referenced before, to reach out to the user profile service, and you pass it, like I said, the search user ID as well as domain ID for your Sitecore Search tenant. And then that returns information. We can then pass that up to a programmable. There's a couple options, actually. You can pass it up to the programmable that basically just surfaces up all that affinity information, however you want it structured. Or you could kind of skip that step if you wanted to, or you could have it return back only specific affinities. You could return those back to the front end, or you could, in my case, I have a decision table here set up the same way as my first use case, which is it gets the most product affinity. So it could be like Sitecore Search, for example, and then it returns back a title, description, and image, or whatever you want to do. And then that could be surfaced in a web experience on our front end. So this hasn't been implemented yet. This is something I actually plan on hopefully achieving by Sitecore Symposium, is to achieve this in the developer portal for that specific use case. So lastly, I'm almost done. Um, lastly, a couple links there. The second is probably the most important. Like I said, I think there was 4 blog posts in there, all kind of talking about similar topics of this specific presentation, some of the customizations I made, and as also, digs much deeper into like code examples of these changes I made. The first 2 links are the pull request for XM Cloud Plus or XM Cloud intro. So if you're curious exactly the changes I made for the Engage SDK, since XM Cloud is still on JSS 21 before 21.6, so it uses the Engage SDK. So it shows exactly the changes I made. And I also include a link to some additional documentation for Cloud versus Engage SDK as well. And that's it for me. Special thanks. I don't know if you'll see this now, but special thanks to Connor O'Shea on the professional services team. He's the one that helped me with the second use case. And yeah, that's it. Any questions for me?